comments? The honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite asked what changes to EI in Bill C-38 and how they benefited the people who are collecting unemployment insurance benefits. Well, C-38 increases the ceiling before which earnings are clawed back from the benefits on EI. So somebody who's on claim, officially unemployed, but doing a job not quite at the level that they were employed at previously can still earn money and earn more money as a consequence of that bill. So my question is, how is not being able to earn more money while on claim a bad thing? How is it not a benefit to the employee?
Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Speaker, it may shock the member. I actually think that's a good provision. I think that there's a number of good provisions contained in Bill C-38, but because they're masked in the fashion they are, because they've been slid under the table where people can't give them the scrutiny, we'll never know. Because they're not allowed to go to the appropriate committee for us to look at, to do the due diligence, we'll never know. But worse, Mr. Speaker, Canadians won't know until it hits them.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his speech and his reflections. I just want to pick up on the issue of the ability of members to scrutinize this legislation. I thought his comments were well placed. And he'll be familiar with an exchange of correspondence between the Parliamentary Budget Office and the clerk of the Privy Council, in which the Parliamentary Budget Officer asked for 82 departments and agencies certain financial and economic data. And he got blown off by 74 of them, and 8 responded. And now the Parliamentary Budget Officer is having to take the government to court to fulfill the government's Bill number 1 in 2006, the accountability legislation. The ironies are resplendent. We've spent 24 hours, more than 24 hours voting in the last week. We were not only tired, but now we're also voting blind. How is it that members of Parliament, let alone a PBO, can scrutinize legislation if, in fact, the government just blows off the Parliamentary Budget Office?
For Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member raises a good point. The Parliamentary Budget Officer is arm's length from this place. He was put there by this government to help with their accountability and transparency, and they shut the door on him. He is a closer person to the Canadian people now than he is to government, because he's standing there on guard for Canadian people. And I'm reminded of the saying that when all the people talk about deregulation and red tape, and my favorite writer was Chris Christopherson, a country singer, who has the one saying, the law is for the protection of the people. It's time for this government to follow the law that it created.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Nickel Belt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague from Hamilton East Stony Creek for his fine work in this House of Commons. And I'd like to ask him a question on OAS. Most of us on this side, well, all of us in this House know that OAS, only the poorest of the poor seniors are entitled to OAS. Even the Conservatives or the deniers on the other side of the House know that that's a fact. So I'd like the honourable member to tell me why he thinks that the Prime Minister went to Davos to announce the OAS and not campaign on that issue during the last federal election.
For Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Well, I don't profess to read the mind of the Prime Minister, but I do understand that the Prime Minister is somewhat of an expert on tactics. And clearly, anybody who considers this change will understand that the Canadian people would be strongly concerned by it. You have people now under the age of 54 that have got to work 2 years longer. You've got people that are on Ontario disability who would have got a modest boost at the age of 65, will not receive it till 67. You've got people who had, God help them, have lost their jobs and they're on welfare. They've got to wait 2 more years to get it. Would you want to raise that in Canada? I think the reality is that the total abysmal mishandling of that situation and the fear that it caused Canadians from coast to coast was reprehensible. The reality is that it took 14 days for them to come to this House with a clear message. Seniors had 2 weeks where some misunderstood, thought they were going to lose their pensions, and that was a total disregard for their feelings.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Edmonton, Leduc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his comments. We don't often agree, but we sit on the Finance Committee together, and I certainly appreciate his work there. I just want to focus more on the NDP's argument that certain issues only belong in certain committees. If you're dealing with OAS, you have to deal with Human Resources. If you're dealing with Environment, you deal with the Environment Committee. The Finance Committee shouldn't be dealing with these issues. But as he knows, the Budget Implementation Act follows the budget. The budget follows the pre-budget consultations, which we've just started again at the Finance Committee. When we do pre-budget consultations, we hear about OAS, we hear about retirement savings, we hear about employment insurance, we hear about from all sorts of environmental groups. Does he think that then we should restrict the pre-budget consultations to not hear from any of these groups? Because these groups certainly hear, over 400 of them present to the Finance Committee, and they expect that their views will be reflected in the pre-budget report, and then in the budget, and then in Budget Implementation Acts. Because if they restrict it at this end in terms of which committee it should go to, is he now suggesting that we change the whole gamut with respect to pre-budget consultations and make them more restrictive?
Excellent question.
Member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Well, what I would suggest that happens is that those briefs that we do hear on the pre-budget hearings that do apply to other areas like fisheries, and that be shared with those committees, that any legislation that comes out of there should be the prerogative of that group, with that ministry, with that minister, to put them forward. I don't believe that the Finance Committee should be the catch-all for everything. I don't believe that an omnibus bill like this serves Canadians well. Yeah. The reality is that it needs more due diligence than we can provide. Within the context of the Finance Committee, yes, it was many hours of work done. But the limited focus that we could apply did not allow us to dig down in the manner we all should. Whether or not our questions are good quality, low quality, anybody can judge that. But it belongs with the expertise of fishery, or it belongs at HRDC. It doesn't belong in finance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend from Hamilton East Stony Creek. I've been listening to the debate this afternoon and noted particularly the member for Crowfoot took the position that none of the amendments were meant to improve the Act. I'm picking up on a point also made by the honourable member who just spoke. I want to make it clear that the amendments that I put forward honoured the government's intent to have streamlining and shortening of hearings. In fact, my amendments continued to have in place a 24-month limit on a panel review of an environmental project. But I added, the amendment that was really important was to say if the proponent is dragging out the time, the clock stops so that you can't have, for instance, a large oil company say we didn't get our environmental assessment report done on time, it took 18 months, so the rest of the interveners have 6 months to study the project. There is much that is very wrong within Bill C-38, and one of the most egregious things is the failure of this House of Commons with only 12 hours of witnesses before the subcommittee that dealt with both environmental assessment and the Fisheries Act to even scratch the surface of the damage that will be done.
The honourable member for Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Well, I have to say that I'm in agreement with the member on this particular point. One of the advantages the member has, there's a lot of disadvantages of sitting as one person from a party, but she was allowed to make those kinds of proposals into this House. We gave over 61 very focused amendments at the Finance Committee that were each and every one defeated by the government members. So the process, again, if you had people that were more expert on the given topic, on the given part of the legislation, they may well have come to a different determination. You had people that were focused on putting through a particular bill. That's their job. But the job of an MP goes much further. The job of an MP is to do the honest due diligence. And part of the job that we all are failing on these days is working together to make legislation better. We've got to take down the walls in this place, Mr. Speaker. We've got to start to work together. This is not what comes out of the PMO that runs the Parliament of Canada. It's got to be the work of this body. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.